She laughed at me. My daughter, standing in my own kitchen, made that small, patient sound. Not cruel, not sharp, just soft and indulgent, the kind you make at someone who's said something a little beyond their understanding. She was leaning against the counter, where I'd made her breakfast an hour earlier. And she looked at me with the particular sadness of someone who has decided you can no longer be trusted with yourself. I had just told her I was managing my own finances, that I was comfortable, that I didn't need anyone to step in. She smiled and glanced at her husband, and he nodded without looking up from his phone. I poured myself a second cup of coffee and listened to the two of them talk about real estate prices, school tuitions, the car they were thinking about upgrading. I was in the room, but they had already continued without me, the way people continue past a landmark they've seen too many times to bother noticing. My daughter's name is Linda. She's 42. She married a man named Mark when she was 28, and for a while I thought it was a good match. He was attentive in the beginning, remembered birthdays, called me respectful things. But over the years, something in him clarified. Not dramatically, the way things rarely do. More like a photograph developing slowly in a dark room until you can finally see what was always there. My husband George died 4 years ago. He was 69 and had spent 31 years building a small commercial greenhouse nursery at the edge of town, the kind of place that smelled like wet soil and cedar and something perpetually alive. He loved that place. I loved it alongside him. After he passed, I kept it running for 8 months before I admitted I was doing it to hold on. Not because I knew what I was doing without him, so I sold it. Linda believed I sold it for around $75,000. That's what she'd gathered from a half-finished sentence. I said once about costs and broker fees and taxes eating into the number. She didn't ask for the complete picture. She assumed, and I let her, the way I had let certain things accumulate over the years without ever deciding to. The actual number was $285,000. A commercial rezoning on that stretch of road had brought 2 developers competing for any available parcel, and George's little nursery ended up in the middle of a situation I hadn't anticipated. I walked out of closing with enough to live carefully and comfortably for the remainder of my life, as long as I was careful. I had been very careful. Linda didn't know any of that. I hadn't corrected her, because some quiet, watchful part of me had understood for a while now that the truth would change things in ways I wasn't prepared to manage. So I let the smaller numbers stand and paid attention to what people did with the assumption. That morning after they left, Linda with a brisk hug, Mark with a take care of yourself, that meant something other than what the words said. I stood at the sink and thought about the call I'd received 5 days earlier. Her name was Janet. She worked at a title company across town that processed county document filings. She had a measured, professional voice, warm but efficient. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said, "I'm calling about a durable power of attorney that was submitted to our office earlier this week. It lists you as the principal and your son-in-law as the agent with full financial authority." I set down my coffee. "We have a document on file from when you refinanced your home 7 years ago," she continued. "The signatures don't match. I flagged the new submission before processing and wanted to reach you directly." I stood very still in my kitchen. "Are you saying someone filed that without asking me?" "I'm saying the signature on the new document is not consistent with what we have on record for you," she said carefully. "I can't make a legal determination, but I am obligated to notify you before recording anything." I thanked her. I told her not to process it. I asked her to hold everything and gave her my attorney's name. Then I sat down at the kitchen table in the silence of my house and looked at my hands for a long time. The worst part wasn't the shock. The worst part was that I wasn't shocked, not really. I was something colder and older than shock. Something that felt like recognition, like a door you've always suspected was unlocked, finally swinging open on its own. Mark had ideas about money. He'd always had them. Over the years, there had been investment proposals, business concepts, a franchise that never launched, a restaurant that lasted 14 months. Linda kept the household running on her salary from the dental office she managed. Mark maintained the dream of something larger. And somewhere along the way, I had become part of his longer calculations. not as a person, as a line item. I'd lent them money twice. $14,000 the first time, when his quarterly sales dropped, and their mortgage came due short. $9,000 the second time for legal expenses. Neither of them explained fully, and I didn't press. I'd paid for my granddaughter's orthodontia, covered a summer camp deposit they'd forgotten to mention until the week it was due. Small things, then smaller things, then things so small they stopped asking and simply expected. I went to see my attorney the next morning. He was a solid, careful man who didn't fill silences with reassurance. I brought everything I had: the call log showing Janet's number, my account statements, the original deed to the house, the nursery closing documents. He reviewed everything and looked at me over his reading glasses. "Did you sign anything in the past few months? Anything at all, even something that seemed routine?" I thought back. There had been a form at Easter. Mark had handed it across the table, already filled out, said something about updating an insurance record. Just needed my signature at the bottom. I had signed it without reading it carefully. The guilt of that settled in my chest like wet sand. My attorney made calls. By that afternoon, we had confirmed the POA document used a forged signature on a different form entirely, not the one I'd signed at Easter. Some attempt at patchwork, clumsy but confident. The confidence was the part that sat hardest. Mark had believed I wouldn't notice, or if I did, that I wouldn't do anything about it. We spent 2 hours in that office. When I walked out, the POA filing had been formally rejected. A fraud alert was on file with the county clerk, and my estate documents were being restructured from the beginning. The will, the trust, every beneficiary designation on every account I held. I drove home past the site where the nursery used to stand. There's a storage facility there now, beige and anonymous. George would have had strong feelings about it. I found myself talking to him quietly in the car, the way I do sometimes when something happens that I can't tell anyone else yet. "I should have been paying closer attention," I said, "but I think I finally am." Linda came 2 days later. I'd been expecting her. Mark must have gotten word that the filing was rejected, and he would have told her, and she would have come to manage the situation. That was always the arrangement between them. He made the moves. She handled the aftermath. She knocked instead of using the key I'd given her. That meant something. I opened the door. She looked tired in a carefully arranged way, the kind of tired that has been styled to look like concern. "Mom, can we talk?" I stepped aside. She came in and sat at the kitchen table. The same chairs. I put on the kettle and waited. "I know something happened with some paperwork," she started, hands folded. "Mark explained it to me. He said there was a misunderstanding, that he was trying to get things in order in case." "In case what?" She paused. "In case something happened to you." "I'm 68 years old," I said. "I just had a physical. My blood pressure is actually better than the national average for my age group." She almost smiled. Then she didn't. "We weren't trying to take anything from you. We just thought if there was ever a situation where you weren't able to make decisions." "Then I have an attorney," I said. "I have documents that are properly notarized with my actual signature, filed with the county, and current. What your husband submitted was none of those things." She looked at the window. "He was trying to help," she said finally. I said her name and let the quiet do some of the work. "Linda, a person who is trying to help asks first." Her jaw tightened. "I've been giving to this family for a long time," I continued. "Not always because someone asked, sometimes because you needed it, and sometimes because I wanted to. But it was always my decision. I always chose. What Mark tried to do was take that choice away from me. Do you understand what I'm saying?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then, very low, "He didn't think you'd actually do anything." That settled in the room between us, like something dropped. I looked at my daughter, the way you look at someone when you're searching for the person you raised inside the person they became. She was still in there somewhere. The girl who used to collect smooth stones from the creek bed and line them along the windowsill. But she had also spent 14 years with a man whose understanding of people was largely transactional. And 14 years of that shapes things. "I know," I said quietly. "That's why he tried." She had nothing left for that. I told her I wasn't angry. I meant it more than she probably believed. What I felt was past anger. A cold, steady clarity, like a window that's been clouded with condensation, suddenly wiped clean from the outside. Everything was sharp now, without distortion. I've made changes to my documents, I said. You'll learn the details through the proper channels when the time comes. I want you to know they are final and they were not made in haste. She stood slowly, the way people do when they are trying to preserve some dignity, even though they understand they've already lost it. So you're done with us? That's it? I'm done being managed without my knowledge, I said. That's not the same thing. She left without finishing her tea. Mark called that evening. I let it ring. He called the following morning and I answered on the third ring, not out of warmth, but because he didn't want to spend the rest of my life bracing for phone calls. He didn't lead with a greeting. You're making a serious mistake. Good morning, Mark. A pause. Then recalibrated. I understand you're upset. I should have come to you first. I see that now. But the way you're reacting is what? It's extreme. It's not who you are. Removing documents that were filed fraudulently is accurate, I said. Not extreme, accurate. He tried several approaches over the next several minutes. That he'd been protecting the family. That I was being selfish with resources that affected more people than just me. That one day I'd understand what he'd been trying to build. Each time he shifted, I simply waited for the angle to exhaust itself. You'll regret this, he said at the end. I've regretted things, I told him. More than I can count, over 68 years. This won't be one of them. I hung up and stood at the back door looking at the garden. George had planted rose bushes along the fence the autumn before he got sick. They came back every spring without being asked. I always thought that was something worth noticing. My niece Kim called that same afternoon. She was 29, working toward a graduate degree in library science up in Portland, living on a careful budget, sending thank you notes that actually said something. She was my brother Gary's daughter. Gary, who died at 53 of a heart attack that surprised all of us. And she had his same quality of presence, the kind that makes you feel like what you're saying is actually landing somewhere. She'd heard something secondhand through the extended family. She didn't ask for details. She just said, "Are you okay, Aunt Helen?" My name, said warmly. I realized I hadn't heard it that way in longer than I could pinpoint. I'm better than I've been in a while, I told her honestly. Good. You sounded worn out the last time we talked, not today. We stayed on the phone for an hour about nothing requiring resolution. Her research, a biography she was reading, the rose bushes, the way fall comes early on the Oregon coast. When I hung up, I felt something ease in my shoulders that I hadn't noticed had been tight. I went back to my attorney that Friday. The will was redrawn. The trust, a small education fund George and I had set up years ago and never fully activated, was now funded properly and redirected. Kim's name went in where it needed to go. An education initiative she'd told me about once. A rural library reading program she'd written a grant proposal for and hadn't received funding for. That went in too. My attorney looked at me when we finished. You seem settled. I am, I said. I wasn't a week ago. People sometimes make these decisions in anger and walk them back later. I made these decisions over 30 years of observation, I told him. The paperwork is just the last step. He signed where he needed to sign. I signed with my actual signature, slow and deliberate, in the handwriting that did not match whatever had been submitted to the county clerk. I drove home past the nursery site again. I seemed to keep doing that. Maybe because it was the place where George and I turned nothing into something, where we learned to read soil and weather and the particular stubbornness of things that want to live. Maybe it's a way of saying to no one in particular, I remember, I know what we built, I know what I left with. Linda called once more the following week. I answered. She didn't mention Mark. She didn't mention the documents or the county filing or the attorney. She said she was sorry for the way things had gone. Not for anything specific, but for the shape of things over time. For the drift. For calling only when something came up and telling herself that was staying connected. I think I stopped asking how you were, she said. Actually asking, I mean. You did, I said gently. I know. We sat with that on the phone. Outside my kitchen window, the October light was doing something extraordinary to the rose bushes, that particular late afternoon gold that only exists when a season is almost finished. "Can I come by sometime?" she asked. Not to talk about any of it, just to be there. "Come Sunday," I said. "I'm making soup. You can help if you want." She came without Mark. That told me she understood something about the terms without my having to name them. She chopped onions and didn't try to steer the conversation anywhere larger than the onions. When we ate at the kitchen table, it tasted like nothing remarkable, which was exactly right. At the door, she hugged me with a different quality than before. Not the easy, habitual hug of someone who assumes your presence. The careful kind. The kind that knows it's asking something. I stood in the doorway after her car turned the corner and looked at the ordinary Saturday evening street. A man walking a terrier. Kids on bikes cutting through the intersection. The unremarkable, irreplaceable texture of a life that belongs to you. I had wondered, somewhere in the middle of all this, whether I was being cruel, whether protecting what was mine constituted a kind of harm to the people who had come to depend on that protection. But then, I thought about Janet's voice on the phone. Professional, unhurried, that careful pause before she came to the point, and I thought about a signature on file that did not match. Someone had made decisions about my life without putting me in the room. Not out of love, out of convenience. I was not the one who had started the cruelty. Saying that plainly, to myself, in my own kitchen at 11 at night, with tea going cool beside me, was the first real breath I'd taken in longer than I could name. Kim sent a card a few weeks later. A few handwritten lines on plain cardstock. She thanked me for the trust, said she hadn't expected it, said she wasn't sure what to say. "Then, you've always been the person who showed up without being asked. I want to be that for someone too. I'm starting with you." I put it in the drawer where I keep things I mean to keep. George used to say that a greenhouse teaches you one thing above everything else. You don't get to control what grows. You prepare the soil, you protect what's vulnerable, you put the right conditions in place, and then you have to trust. The rest isn't yours to manage. I am 68 years old. I have a house with my name on the deed and accounts with my name on every document. A will that reflects what I actually mean, and a niece who calls to ask how I am without needing anything in return. I have rose bushes that come back in April without being reminded. A kettle older than my daughter's marriage. A signature no one will be substituting again. I spent a long time making myself small, quiet enough, agreeable enough, invisible enough not to complicate anything. I told myself it was love, that it was what you do for family. But here is what I know now. Grace is not silence. Love does not look like disappearing. A woman who has spent 40 years doing things that mattered, raising a child, running a business, losing a husband, continuing, does not owe anyone a diminished version of herself just because the smaller version would be easier to work around. If you're hearing this and you recognize it, if you've been called mom more times than your own name, if you've funded lives that moved on without turning back to look, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not wrong for protecting yourself. You are not bitter for finally reading the ledger. You are not cruel for making them uncomfortable. You are the main account holder. You are the principal on every document that matters. Act like it.